Mental health is a long, winding journey with the destination sometimes close, sometimes far away, but the journey is the part we want to focus on today. During this lifelong camino, we are challenged to build resilience, hope, balance, fulfillment, authenticity, and happiness, along with a strong sense of belonging with ourselves. I've always said that the backup plan to every relationship you have is you. So prepare accordingly through self-love, self-appreciation, self-respect, and self-care. Unfortunately, in our Latine community, mental health barriers involve cultural, systematic, and individual factors, including stigma, cultural beliefs, language barriers, financial constraints to actually getting care, including being the most likely to be uninsured. And access to services are a problem, not to mention access to information. ¿Qué tal? I'm Antonio Tijerino, host of the Fritanga podcast by the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. Today, in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we're excited to host a real conversation about unique experiences our community faces when addressing mental health and wellness. We are joined by Los Angeles-raised writer, actor, producer, and multi-talented creative force, Curly Velasquez. Curly is a social media star inspiring millions to live life authentically y sin pena. As a proud child of Central American immigrants, his storytelling brings humor, comfort, understanding, while celebrating the beautiful complexities of the Latine experience. Most of our listeners will probably recognize Curly from his work at BuzzFeed, where he moved up from office receptionist to becoming a lead creator for their Latinx division, Pero Like. In addition to his work with BuzzFeed, Curly is also the host of PBS's Dead and Buried, a series exploring our society's ever-evolving attitude towards death, including the growing trends towards openness and honesty about end-of-life care. Joining Curly is my mental health Sherpa, an indefatigable advocate for the wellness of our immigrant communities, Cheryl Aguilar. As the founder, director, and therapist at Hope Center for Wellness, a multicultural mental health practice focused on holistic healing, Cheryl is a proud Hondureña and licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience in the public and private sectors. Recognized as the 2023 Social Worker of the Year by the National Association of Social Workers DMV chapter, Cheryl's clinical expertise spans depression, anxiety, trauma, and addiction with a focus on youth, adults, and families. She's particularly dedicated to serving immigrants and refugees, offering culturally sensitive support and training programs. On this episode, we'll cover a lot, including our personal experiences and aspirations in reaching for mental wellness. We are grateful you're joining us on this journey of self-awareness and mindfulness because we need to be there for each other. And we are. So now, let's fritanga. All right, Cheryl and Curly, welcome to Fritanga. Hey, Central American Day, right?
Woo!
Oh, yes.
How often does that happen?
It should happen every day.
Yeah, not often enough.
Absolutely. All right. I just want to start by when I was talking to Curly before we got this started, and he told me that he's at his parents' house because he just loves family, loves being close to them, and sometimes even will crawl into his mom's side of the bed just to feel that connection. I have to start there. And I told Curly too, that my daughter just got back from San Diego State University. She's a freshman and she was really sick. And so last night she actually woke me up, scared me, but at like 3:30 in the morning and just crawled into bed next to me. I thought that was over from the time she was 10 years old. But that comfort that we get from our parents, even as we get older, and look, here's this amazing star that is world known, but he still wants to be close to his mommy. Talk about that, please, Curly.
Thank you for that. Oh, thank you. I'm really very big on family. A lot of what I talk about in my content, a lot of what I write about is the connection to family, right? A lot of times we talk about our elders, but just like the exchange of information and knowledge that we can give, that we can teach each other, both the kids and the parent at the same time, right? So like being able to come back home and be with parents who have not only been compassionate with me in my growth, but I've also kind of given them that as well, has given us this really beautiful space to be like can we just hang out? Like, we don't have to do anything. I just want to hang next to you. I just want to like take a nap next to you. We don't want to talk. I have this thing about wasting time. I'm very big about don't waste time. And I tell everybody, you will never, ever, ever regret spending time with people that you love. You'll have a lot of regrets in life. And knowing me, like, I'm an ex-cokehead alcoholic and I have a lot of those, but I have never, ever regretted spending a couple of hours with people that I love. So hanging out in my mom's bed, smelling her little lotions and her perfumes, in the pillows and in the sheets, like there's just something that you're like, oh, I'm comforted. I feel good being here. And I knock out, I sleep like a baby.
Isn't that the sweetest thing, Cheryl?
That is, and you know, that says. I want to go to your mom's house. That says a lot.
That's not everybody's experience, right?
Yeah, you know, that says a lot about what your parents, what your family has created in terms of safety. That you can come back to a place that feels warm and cared for. So I think kudos to your parents for creating that environment for you to come back to. And I feel like we can all take notes from parents like your parents.
Oh my God, thank you for that. Yeah, I tell them that all the time. I'm like, it has to be both ways, right? We sometimes forget that our parents were also teenagers at one point. We forget that they also had parents that didn't know what they were doing, that raised them, and being able to give them that compassion of being like, when you know better, you did better. You know, the whole like Oprah quoting Maya Angelou, you always did what you knew you had to do, and when you knew better, you did better.
Look, and it's give and take, as you said, Curly, because think about the pressure that's on a Latino kid. Mm-hmm. You are the IT person for the family as like a 12-year-old. You're the financial advisor. You're the translator. Yeah. Like dynamic between us, even though, and I think sometimes it can almost become threatening, but at the same time, we lean on each other in a Latino.
Yeah. Do you know what's really interesting with my experience is that I hear a lot of other Latino kids talking about like being the translators and doing all those things. I feel like my main job as a young kid I was the therapist. Like I have been. So my parents were from a war-torn country. They came over from El Salvador before and during the Civil War that was happening there throughout the 80s. And they came over very young. Like they didn't have the tools. There's no thing of this communication. There's no let's talk this out, or there's no little tricks of the trade, right? So a lot of times people resort to violence when they don't know how to communicate certain ideas or certain emotions. And so there was a lot of violence in my household, and we're very open about it as a family. My dad is very like, he gives me the space. He's like, son, talk about it as often as you need to talk about it until you heal. And so for me, I remember being 13 years old and kind of hearing what they were trying to say to each other, but not necessarily saying it to each other. So I would make us have family meetings. I was 13 years old. I would have my parents and my older sister sit down. I would be like, okay, guys, I have 3 rules when we communicate with each other. No yelling, because nobody wants to listen to anyone who's yelling at them. Like we go into a different state when someone's yelling at us, right? Like we're not listening. No crying. Like I know that we get emotional sometimes, but sometimes it's really hard to talk when you're trying, like when you're kind of getting into that kind of a mode of crying. And then the no walking away. Sometimes the walking away part can be a little dangerous because sometimes you do have to walk away if a situation is getting too violent. So, but at the time it was like, you guys, I know it's hard, but we got to stay in the circle. We got to let's get to the end of it. So here I am, 13 years old, translating for 30-year-olds, being like, what I'm hearing, or 40-year-olds, I think at the time, I was like, what I'm hearing mom say is she feels like you don't see her. And what I'm hearing dad say is he feels like you always want to have the last word, or whatever it is, right? Like, so I had to kind of grow up really quickly, emotionally, which has been great, by the way, because I just apply it to every relationship that I have now. I'm like, I see that you're being activated. Where in your body are you feeling this? And how can we, you know what I mean? Like, what's the next thing how do we resolve this issue?
I have to say that we grow up as Latinos almost normalizing a colorful version of abuse. So hear me out on this. Mm-hmm. We laugh about it, but it's more prevalent than other communities in terms of dads getting the belt, la paja, or mom pulling off her chancla. Mm-hmm. And culturally, we make fun of timeout approach to raising children, but it physically hurts, and it hurts down the road, along with verbal abuse and mind manipulation and other forms of frustration that we have normalized. And those can impact our relationships going forward. And I think it speaks to the amazing presence of Curly, but that doesn't necessarily happen in families. Cheryl, how do you see that cultural tolerance of a version of abuse, even though we laugh at it, that actually can escalate?
I think culturally, there's so much that we have passed on generation to generation that we get to evaluate now. And I think one of the things that I was really appreciating about Curly is how you were kind of like you call yourself a therapist in the household, but what we're really doing is we're learning to undo things that are harmful to our communities. And la chancleta and la chancla and, bringing out the sandal and the belt, that's something that generation after generation, our parents or grandparents might have learned, but we are the generation that gets to change that. We sometimes make fun of it or make light of it. But as Tony was saying, it inflicts pain, and it's pain that could be long lasting. So one of the things, for instance, that I kind of tell my clients or individuals that I speak to is that when you hit a child, they get two messages. The person that loves me is also a person that can hurt me. And sometimes we end up in relationships like that, whether it's romantic relationships or work relationships that are like that. They have pain and love at the same time. So we have learned to normalize that throughout life. So I think as parents, as a community, as the next generation to change things forward, we get to challenge the things that we have learned that our parents might have not known because their parents taught it that way, and we get to do it differently.
No, I think that's really interesting too. One of the things that I always talk about how I was kind of at what I call like the digital renaissance of Latino online content a couple of years ago, right? When it was Pero Like at BuzzFeed, Me Too, Remezcla, Flama, all these big networks were coming out, and we were popularizing, we knew that a chancla joke would hit really well. I think one of our competitors did a video about like the chancla Olympics, right? Like who could hit their son with the chancla. And it was a funny thing, but you're right. Like we laugh about it. I remember telling my friend Tanya Saracho, who wrote Vida and was showing her Vida, I was like, there are 4 chancla jokes in the movie Coco. Like I'm like, when are we gonna let the chancla joke go? I'm like, I never got spanked with the chancla. They kind of skipped the chancla and went towards the belt. But at the same time, what's been really cool, I will say this, that I love about creating content on the internet, in real time, you get feedback from the community, right? So like you would hear these kind of other aspects of being able to talk to your children in different ways. Hey, chanclas and making jokes about hitting your kid are not funny. Like maybe we need to stop making it as a community. Like we need to heal that aspect. I also see that when we talk about like certain things about our culture, por ejemplo, like when we go to a party, what do we say to our kids? Hay que saludar a todos. Ve a saludar, like go say hi. If you don't say hi, and I made a joke about that years ago online where I was like, something about like those are the Latino rules, and people wrote to me saying, sometimes it's like you got to give, not sometimes, but it's nice to give the kids the autonomy over themselves to be able to say, I actually don't want to say hi to that weird person at the party. I actually don't want to go and give everybody a kiss on the cheek. Like that's old school. That's an old tradition. And it's not a reflection on the kid. It's not a reflection on the parent. It's just giving the child and the kid just kind of like the space to be able to say, hi, give a big wave. I'm not comfortable with kissing everybody. Like, but I think you're right, Sho, what you were saying about there's a lot of things that we have as a culture that we're slowly starting to change and being like, that's the old times. Like, I'm also not offended if you have a kid that comes in and the kid no saluda, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to trip because a 6-year-old doesn't want to say hi to me.
They're shy or feel threatened or whatever.
Exactly. And look, I'm the life of the party. They'll come around later. They'll be like, that guy's singing and dancing over there. What's he doing? Let's go. So I'm not tripping.
Yeah. And what a great way to teach from really early on. We don't have to accept everyone who comes and hugs us and kisses us. We can say no. And that, we start from really early on. Like all these ideas about la chancla, about who do we reach out to, who do we allow in our personal space, we begin from really early on. And the more that we do it early on, the better it becomes or the more solidified it becomes as we get older too.
Absolutely. You know which tradition I do like that I hope never change? Los que llegan saludan. If you're coming to the party after me, you should come and wave and say hi. That's my thing where I'm like, man, I get up, yo me levanto. If it's an elder, yo me levanto and I'll say hi. I don't mind. I don't care. But sometimes I'm like, bro, you got here after. Why can't you come say hi to me? Like, what the hell? You know, that's my one.
That is so true with parents too. Like from point A to point B seems to be farther than from point B to point A.
Yeah.
You have to call them and initiate the conversation.
You know what? Let me refrain. If it's an elder, you should go say hi to the elders first. That's what I think. You know, like if I see one of my tias coming in, yo siempre me voy a levantar, and I get up to go and say hi to the tias or the tios, you know? But I'm like, you know, what the hell? I'm not trying to, I don't know. Maybe not family. I don't know. I'm all spiraling now.
No.
Well, I think, there's certain rules that you're talking about. There's certain rules that we want to continue to honor, because there are great rules within our families and our communities, right? Like respect to our elders, being able to communicate. And what we're seeing with the younger generation is that they're really forcing us to rethink the rules. Can we also, as adults, embrace the younger generation in a way that is not top down, but they're also, they're showing a lot of leadership this way? So what are the rules that we have in our families that we can continue to honor and keep? But what are the rules that we can also continue to explore and see if there's an opportunity for tweaking or changing? Like one of the things that I hear a lot about in our community is, me tienes que respetar. You have to respect me. And what we're hearing the younger generation say, well, respect is earned.
Yeah.
And we have to learn from that too. What is it that our young children need in terms of respect, and how do we give it so we can earn it as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I respect youth tremendously. All right. So we are here to talk about mental health. We jumped right in, which is what I expected,
nice.
Talking to both of you, and wellness. So let me start by asking how you're both doing in that sense, because it changes sometimes day to day, moment to moment. So it's almost like a trick question, right? Like I was having a great day yesterday and something triggered me and it changed everything for a moment, but then I got back on track. And so what are those tools that we can use to pivot back to being on track after something pops up that affects us? I remember feeling like with those things that, when you're driving and they tell you if you hit a patch of ice, you don't turn away from the ice, you actually turn into the slide, and then you get traction and you turn away from it. That's how I've always been with my feelings, the exact same thing. But I know that's not for everyone. So what do you two think in terms of that pivot where something triggers you, and how do you bounce back?
One of the things I love about our human experience is that nothing lasts forever, or the concept that things are constantly changing. And I think about our emotions, and even in the word emotion, there's the word motion. Things are always movement. So in moments like that, when we may feel frazzled or distressed or depressed or sad or angry, knowing that those emotions shall pass, but during that time, we do something to alleviate how intense those emotions may feel. I love deep breathing. I'm always deep breathing, maybe just taking a few minutes, a few seconds to like inhale and exhale when I'm noticing myself getting out of balance. There's so many things that we can do that is within our disposal, but deep breathing is one that I really love to go to. Really, it's my go-to because it's within us. So knowing that from a hot moment, we can go from a hot moment to a cold moment, or from a cold moment to a hot moment, and all we need is time. One of the things I love to say is that in those moments, it's our job to kind of help our body, our mind, and our soul come back to balance, help our nervous system come back to how it wants to be. And we offer some techniques to that, like grounding. I'm always talking about grounding, but what does grounding even mean? Coming back to our center, coming back to our source. These are things that we can do every day. And also, I'm a therapist, so I'm always going to advocate for therapy. So if we try all these things, all these techniques that we're going to talk about, and they may not seem like they work, and we experience distress for over 2 weeks and ongoingly, then that's the time to check in with a professional.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It's so funny because nowadays I don't really ask people like, how are you? I ask people like, how's your spirit? I always feel like that kind of like is a little, because how are you can sometimes be like, I went to go get coffee the other day and a barista was like, Curly, how are you? And I was having a weird day and I'm like, do you have time? I have so much like, I was like, am I gonna cry in this line right now? Like, what's the but I feel like, so I like to ask people, how's your spirit? Where are you? Where's the flag on the pole right now? Like, is it midway? Is it like up high? Like, are you fluttering in the wind? Like, how are you feeling? I love that what you said, Cheryl, so much. I was having this conversation with a man who identified as indigenous Guatemalan, and he was telling me how that humans tend to forget that we're part of nature, right? And he's like, if you look at the sky, sometimes the sky is beautiful and blue, and sometimes it's gray, but we always know that it'll always come back to being blue. Like, we know that it fluctuates, and we just understand the sky. We understand the seasons. We understand nature. And he was like, so what would make you think that your mind, your spirit, and your heart and your body, which are also part of nature, will also not fluctuate in that same way as well? Sometimes, yes, you'll have clouds, but the clouds will eventually, hopefully, clear, right? And you'll have clearer skies and all those things. So I try to hold on to the same notion of what I do is I was reading this thing that was saying that when you have the feeling, you have the thought, the anger, the sadness, the happiness, taking one step aside and being like, I am aware that I am having the thought that I am sad. And then you can even take the step even further. I am aware that I am having the thought that I am sad, right? Like, kind of seeing the emotion for exactly what you were saying. That's something that is I love that show that you said it has the word motion in it. Like, that's so dope. Like, you're right. It's just passing through. You can start to ask yourself, are these emotions real? Like, is it real that I feel like I'm feeling a little ugly right now? I feel bloated. I don't feel as sexy as I usually do. Like, is that true? Like, do you feel like you're not attractive? Like, and then on the other aspect too, can you use your emotions as a compass, right? So like, what are you going to go do? Like, for me, I'm going to get a haircut later because I feel like I'm like a little hairy roly-poly over here. So I'm like, I need to go get my beard trimmed. I need to go get like a little touch up and done. Using your emotions as a compass, I think, in real time. What are you anxious about? Go talk to that person. Are you anxious that you have a project coming up? Go, like, I'm a procrastinator, so I'll get anxious about a deadline. And I'm like, if you're so anxious, girl, go get started on the damn thing. What are you doing over here sitting on the couch and getting nervous about starting the project? But I feel like being able to take a step back, and Tony, you mentioned this too, like letting yourself feel it, acknowledging it, being like, you know what? It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be angry. And then sitting in that for a little bit. And then what do you do? What's the next move after? My friend Mish Prada, her mom always says, like, life is all about decisions. You make one decision, and if you don't like the results, you just make another one. It's a series of choices, and you keep moving forward. So if you want to be sad, or if you're sad, it's okay. But then what? Let's go get some boba. Let's go watch a movie. You know?
Well, I did want to get back though to what Cheryl said. That it almost simplified. It's when you need help, go find help. But it's not that easy to find help. I can tell you that in our own situations, you try to find a therapist. It's not that easy. And that's that we have insurance and we have means and we're knowledgeable and we know what resources are available. And it still can take 8 months to actually find someone that you can talk to. And then it has to be a match. So can you talk about that axis, Cheryl, and all the impediments? And then some people have to find somebody that speaks Spanish and that's culturally aware. And then battle all of the different stigmas in our communities to be able to do that. There's a lot impeding getting that help beyond those flashes of sadness or anger or helplessness or that we all go through.
Yeah. You know, once someone makes that decision to go find help, I think it's one of the most important decisions. It's such a courageous decision. And my wish for the world and in this country is that anybody who wants help can get it right away. Unfortunately, that's not the case. You know, there's a shortage of providers. There's a shortage of bilingual and multilingual providers. So any student out there, become a therapist. You know, I'm always looking for new therapists to recruit. But there are barriers to many barriers to access, and one is the shortage. In many jurisdictions, many different places. There's long waiting lists to be served, but there is support. So one thing I say, if you're connected with a medical provider, you can begin there, exploring with your medical provider some resources within your community. If you're connected to a church, you can begin there, exploring with your churches who they may know within the community. I actually get a lot of referrals from our local churches here. If you have a kid and your kid is involved in the school system, there's now a mental health movement within the schools of counselors, psychologists, social workers, and by connecting kids to support, sometimes the schools go beyond that and help families connect support as well. So see where you're plugged in and connected and begin there. If you have insurance, that makes things a lot easier for many people who have insurance. And if you don't have insurance, that makes it a lot difficult. And many within our community, within our immigrant community, do not have health insurance or have health insurance that includes mental health. Like, for instance, DC is one of those areas where people can have Medicaid insurance for all, but Medicaid does not include mental health. So what do we do with that? We find clinics that are considered federally qualified clinics that may have supports for anybody regardless of their immigration status or anybody regardless of their ability to pay. And I think for us providers, what we do is that we become really creative about how we provide our services out to the community. Like, I'm a huge believer of support groups, which is a way for many of us to come together around a same issue. And what I love about support groups, that it's not just learning from the facilitator or the therapist, it's learning from one another. So as providers, we provide more of those spaces out there. And I think as everyday community members, something that Curly said that I really loved is asking people checking in on people. We can all do that.
And I think Curly, for instance, a perfect example. As an influencer, I mean, we're talking about at a very high level. You've openly discussed the pressures of constantly being in the public eye and the challenges of balancing that authenticity, keeping it along with the productivity. That's a lot of pressure. Being in such a public and powerful yet vulnerable space, what do you do to protect your mind, heart, and soul? And then to not just protect, but to project forward towards happiness.
I've been in the influencing game for a very long time. Like, I've been on the internet since before. I remember when the term, like, we were like BuzzFeed personalities, like blowing up on YouTube. And I remember I started in the kitchen. I used to stock their sodas. I used to stock their snacks and serve their lunches sometimes. And like, I remember walking by the real influencers, right? Like the YouTubers at work. And I remember hearing them go, "Oh, we're called influencers now. It's this whole new thing called influencers." And I remember holding my sodas and holding my snacks at the stock. And they were like, "Yeah, we can stay at houses for free if we promote it on our Instagram, or we get things for free if we promote it on Instagram." And at the time it was like, whoa, it's so different. And so I've grown up in this now for like 10 years. And I feel like part of what I have always wanted to do was put out things that had to deal with authenticity. I'm not interested in showing you a cool house that I'm in. I'm not interested in showing you a cool outfit. What I do want to show you is the cool relationship that I have with my abuela before she passed away, right? I wanted to show you that like these different generations could come together and talk about gay sex and talk about drugs, talk about how my grandma used to grow weed on her balcony in the 60s and the 70s, like, have these conversations. Then when she got into dementia, talk about what it's like to grieve somebody in real time who is going through something, talk about somebody who then passes away, who, meant a great deal to me. I love talking about my family. I love talking about the fact that I had an addiction. I love talking about the good moments and the bad moments and everything in between. So I feel like when you're putting out things that are relatable in terms of the human connection, you're showing a lot of yourself, but you're also protecting a lot of you, because you're kind of like, people can say whatever the fuck they want about any influencers. And I'm like, you guys know my heart. You guys know my family. You guys know what I do. What do I post on my Instagram? That I'm at a Little League game. What do I post on my Instagram? That I'm hanging out with my grandma before she passed away in her hospice care. What am I doing? I'm taking my mom to go eat or go have a treat. So I feel like showing up authentically is what ends up protecting you in a lot of ways.
And that's how we our mental health stigma, by talking about what we're going through, by talking about our experiences with support, the more we talk about our stories, the more others are inspired to connect with support if they need to.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And it's been fun. It's been great to be like, you can be gay, you can be Latino, you can be somebody that's dealing with your own demons and still be in your own lane and not be the stereotypes of what we expect each other to be, and live a full life.
And I love that both of you have this purpose beyond your own mental well-being. And Curly, you've been heroic about being open through your own mental health journey. And I want to hear from both of you talking about that sense of responsibility that you have for others. Also, it's hard when you're a source of inspiration, strength, and resources to other people. How do you handle not having somebody else's trauma affect you? And that's a real thing. And you, Cheryl, as a therapist and as a counselor and a social worker, you're taking on other people's trauma, y se te pega, right? And the same thing with you, Curly. I'm sure you're getting all kinds of messagings and IMs that kind of become part of who you are. And you have to not only deal with your own, and I'm sure it's therapeutic to deal with somebody else's stuff, but at the same time, some of it te pega. So I don't know, we can start with Cheryl real quick, and then Curly, I want to hear what you say.
Yeah, if I didn't have a therapist, I couldn't do what I do. I think our work
That's so strong.
is therapists have therapists, and being up close to some human suffering is really difficult. When I first started the field, you go to school, you get trained, you read the books, and it's a different experience where you're seeing actual individuals with their hearts opening up to you. And I remember it was really difficult for me. I was working with youth who were really young, who were having a lot of challenges at home, who were disconnecting from their schools, from their community, who were turning to gangs, who were turning to drugs, and couldn't find their way out of those things. And it was, for me, heartbreaking. And I had to learn really quickly, how do I deal with their emotions outside of my sessions, because I was bringing their stories with me when I was coming home. Therapists can be impacted by something we call secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. We just begin to experience what our clients experience. And with time, we develop skills and resources and support to be able to kind of manage our own distress because of the work that we're doing. I have many different outlets for that. After I leave work and before I come home, I have like my little routines that I do before I transition back into my house. I may go and walk around the block a few times. If I'm working from home, I come out of my house, and I'm really deliberate to kind of separate the space where I'm doing work and where I'm doing personal life. I talk to other people, I do my grounding exercises, but something that has been really helpful to me is to really understand that people are resilient and have their strength. So when I'm worrying about fulanito, menganito at nighttime, I'm also trying to remember the strength and the resilience that they have shown me in our work together. And I kind of honor that. So in addition to my own therapist, I also, I'm Christian. I'm a Christian. I connect to my spirituality, and I draw upon that for a sense of strength and support for myself as well when I'm doing this work.
And I think Curly is a form of a therapist, because he's reaching, instead of one-on-one, he's reaching, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands. Curly, how do you deal with that? And you talked about from the time you were a little kid, you were the therapist within
Well, it's hard. Like, Cheryl, I love, by the way, that you said that you also hold on to their resilience as part of like your own healing as well. I love that. Like, I feel like it's interesting because early on, I would start getting a lot of messages from a lot of people who were putting a lot of things on me that, number one, I was in my 20s. I didn't know how to carry any of it. Number two, like, I'm not a trained professional, so I didn't even know how to react to even certain videos that people would send me of things that they were doing that I was like, I'm not equipped for this. So I actually had to set a boundary for my own mental health that I no longer actually open private messages. I only reply through comments, and I'm happy to share space together with other people there, because it is very hard to be sitting at home and know that somebody's going through this, or somebody's going through addiction, or somebody also wants to know, like, how did you stay sober for close to 10 years? And I'm in day 6 and I really need help. And I'm not a trained professional. So it gets very hard. And then there's that guilt that comes with that, right? Like there's that guilt of being like, I have a responsibility to these people, but at the same time, I have a responsibility to myself to make sure that I'm being okay, that I can go to bed, that I'm not like taking on all this energy that I don't have the capacity to fully understand in a way that can actually be helpful. So what I try to do is I share resources on my Insta stories. I definitely talk, but I think that about what I'm going through. But I think that what I try to do mostly is give some tips, create content that is like, look, this is how I stayed sober for a long time, or like, hey, this is what I went through and you can also make it through as well. What has been kind of what I talk about mostly now, I was invited to host a show last year for PBS about death. It was called Dead and Buried. And so the show was online, and it was all about grief and just dying. Sorry, my doorbell's going off. And so being able to talk about grief, just sharing, and then having people just write comments, it goes back to exactly what Cheryl was talking about, how like there's a moment of like one-on-one therapy, but being in group therapy, it's kind of like when I open up, people will open up as well in the comment section. And it's kind of this digital space to read different people's stories who are also dealing with grief, losing somebody to dementia, losing an elder or a motherly figure. And it kind of just makes for like a collective healing. And so that's kind of like what I try to do, is create the spaces. Because I also don't want, I'm sometimes the toxic friend. I'm going to tell you, like, Cheryl, Tony, you want to call your ex-girlfriend, your ex-boyfriend, call them. Do it. Let's see what happens. So I'm not trying to be out here giving people advice. Yo soy el amigo tóxico. You know, like I'm here for the plot. I'm here for the novela. So I also just don't want to give people bad advice. I can be very open and I can listen. But I'll be like, you're right. We should go creep on his Instagram. You can borrow my fake account and go look at his stuff.
So fun. So Cheryl, you and I have had so many conversations over the years, and I really lean on you as kind of my Sherpa in supporting our community's mental health and wellness. I'm pretty good in terms of being self-aware, and often pretty self-critical of myself as I look at issues. Curly and I were talking earlier. I when people don't like being wrong or whatever, I love being wrong. It solves that issue so much faster that I can just say, you know what, I'm sorry about that. You're right. Instead of going back and forth. So I'm pretty self-aware, and also I'm also somebody that wakes up happy every day, and I'm the most fulfilled person in the world through my work, relationships, and families. But yet I'm curious about some of my reactions to situations and relationships that seem to come from somewhere in the past. And I remember reaching out to you, recently, and I'm ready to excavate and find out why sometimes I react to certain situations so viscerally, including a couple months ago, like I said, when I reached out to you. But was it a reaction to something that happened in childhood trauma, maybe, or other things? So I'm ready to dig in and understand and modify those reactions. But for a lot of people, addressing repressed trauma is reigniting and reliving that trauma potentially. So any advice to our listeners on the best approach to addressing some of these deeply hidden traumas that usually manifest themselves at some point in different times that seem out of the blue, but they're not. Everything comes from somewhere, I always say.
Everything comes from somewhere, and I 100% agree. And I would say, sometimes we try to do things on our own, but when we're talking about trauma, that's when we may need someone else, a professional who may be able to guide us on things. There's a lot of self-help books, and there's a lot of information out there that could be really helpful. But when we're kind of tackling and going inward, there may be times where we may not be able to do it by ourselves. And, this idea of, I always say, people say, oh, in our community, especially, ponemos todo debajo de la alfombra, like we just kind of bury everything under the rug.
Yeah, I want to excavate. Let's find out what's hidden under there, under the ground.
Exacto. It could be really overwhelming to excavate. And what happens is, like, our distress doesn't go away. It manifests in different ways. It manifests in our body. It manifests manifests in our emotions. It manifests in the way that we think, in the way that we feel. So we may not be talking about it or thinking about it, but it's not going away. One of the things about trauma that we know is that, and this, there's some controversy around this because we don't want people to go through really hard things in life, but trauma can also build resilience. So they always say there's the good news about trauma. One of the things that I saw during the pandemic is that people who had experienced really hard situations in life better during the pandemic because they were already used to adversity and have figured out ways to navigate adversity than people who hadn't had really hard experiences. What we learn, and not just from our parents, our caregivers, but also our environment, really shapes who we are and really shapes how we think and how we feel. And if there's situations of adult trauma, they may manifest in the present moment. So sometimes we may be, I talk about this all the time. I may be talking to you, Tony, but I may be, perhaps if I have a trigger, I may be relating to you, not as you yourself, but as some other memory of someone else, someone that you may symbolize. So this happens all the time, and when we have past traumatic experiences, how they may manifest in the future into our relationship as well. So there's people sometimes ask, is it really about the past, or is it something that I'm reacting to in the future? And it can be both. It could be new distress that we may go through in life that we're reacting to. But when it comes to relationships, when it comes to having challenges with one another, sometimes it comes from how we might have experienced relationships in the past, coming from our caregivers or an environment. A lot of times, I would say.
Past relationships and everything else. Yeah, no, I look at that as baggage that you didn't unpack and you just carried around with you until it got too heavy, and then you react to it. How about you, Curly, in terms of dealing with things in the past? I mean, you're standing at that intersection of so many different things, from coming out at a young age to being in the limelight at a young age and dealing with some of the demons that you mentioned and all the temptations and pressures. And then you're dating someone, and that guy is now not just dating you, is dating your entire past, is dating your ancestors in some way.
Well, I did want to say too, but I'm the child of immigrants, right? Like they came over undocumented, and they have insane stories of how they got here, right? So like there is a lot of history that I come from. I think for me, I have always kind of had like this self-awareness. Like I really love when you said everything comes from something, right? Like I think that taking a step back and trying to understand what is me and what is being activated right now in this moment. Because a lot of times we think that we've healed from something as well. Step one of being able to recognize your emotion is already very hard for a lot of people, right? But step two of being able to even know that the emotion is still there can also be very difficult. Like I, for example, I thought I had healed from the trauma of witnessing the type of abuse that I did as a young person, right? I remember I shot a video where I was learning how to box, and they asked me to spar with another fighter at the gym. And there were only women that could spar with me. And I remember being like, I don't want to fight a woman. Like, I don't want to hit a woman. And they were like, do you think she can't fight? Like, she's training just like you are. You think don't take that away from her either. So I was like, oh, fuck. Like, okay, let's spar. The minute I landed my first punch, I started to hyperventilate. I couldn't breathe. I started crying. Oh, I'm getting emotional now thinking about it. I started like crying, and it just made me think like, I don't want to hit a woman. I don't want to do this. I saw it. And
have you seen that kind of scene when you were younger?
Yeah, look at me. I'm getting all emotional right now. Like it was just kind of like a thing where I felt like, oh shit, I still have things to resolve. I still have things that like, it just really bothered me. And I remember being like, take, because you have to wear a helmet when you're sparring. I was like, take it off of me, take the mouth gear off. Like I can't breathe. I don't like that I did that. I went home sobbing. I went home crying. I came to visit my parents, and I told them what had happened, and they were very open about it. But I think that those moments also gave me more of like a space to learn more about myself. So now I tell people, I'm very forgiving. I'm very patient. I don't yell. I'm very open with communication. I don't do well with abrasiveness. I don't do well with people getting activated and big and upset. if there's any sign that this might turn violent, that's it. Like, that is like my like clear boundary, and being able to express that straight up to people right away when I'm getting into relationships with anybody that I'm dating. You know, I never would have learned that if I didn't, you know, get into that spar. So I think kind of like the consistent and the constant self-reflection and looking inward and almost like dissecting the different emotions, I think is super important.
That is such a powerful anecdote. I can just see it. You're in the place of something that you've seen, and now you're the aggressor suddenly.
Yep.
Word.
Oh man. Yeah, it was intense for me. But it's, you know, later on when I had the actual fight, I got my ass beat. So, you know, karma.
You know, Curly, as you say that, and I appreciate you sharing that with all of us. You know, we're talking about self-awareness, and people ask, well, how do you feel that? You know, I can tell meditation is one way, kind of practicing mindfulness and meditation is one way that we can grow our self-awareness. Self and But one of the two questions that I'm always asking myself, and I suggest people ask themselves, is when they see a behavior or thought or something that feels out of balance or out of baseline for themselves, themselves this question of where does this come from, looking inward as an investigator. Where does this come from? What is this about? Just creating the space to be curious about what's happening, especially if that's not someone that you know yourself to be. You know, creating that curiosity about, that's interesting, let me investigate even more.
Yeah, I do the thing. I go like, what time? I ask myself, what time did this feeling start? Where was I? Okay, 2 p.m. I feel like around 2 p.m. it started. What was it? Oh, you were on a phone call with somebody and they said, we'll talk later. And that gave you anxiety. So like, I try to trace things back to exactly what you were saying. Like, what is that? You know, and even if you have to do it to what time of day was it? Where were you? What were you wearing? Like, go back to it so you can acknowledge how to move forward from it.
You're the most thoughtful person. Have you all ever had a panic attack? I've had them, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I didn't know what it was, and my kids have them, and so I passed that down along with ADHD and dyslexia and other things.
Yeah.
Hopefully, also their charm and winning personalities. I got that from their mom, but I really, it's identifying some of these things make it easier to deal with, because when I didn't know that I was having a panic attack, I thought I was dying. I thought I couldn't breathe. Everything was getting hot. I was an out-of-body experience. And then now at least I can identify what's happening, and I'm trying to, you know, through breathing and other things, and even just distracting yourself with headphones on and listening to something helps. But where did that start? Again, everything comes from somewhere. And so who knows what I had happen at some point of my life that triggers a panic attack. I don't know how it all works. Cheryl, I'll defer to you, but have you ever had one of those, Curly?
Oh yeah. Do you want to go first, Cheryl, or?
I can tell you, I have had panic attacks for
You've
sure.
had one?
Oh yes.
Oh, they're terrible.
They're really, you feel like you're dying. You're right, like you're having a heart attack. And you know, panic attacks are intense fears. Like the way that I describe them, like if all your fears were to accumulate and talk to you all at once, and you don't even know what they're saying to you, but you know it's intense enough. That's kind of how it feels. How it feels like to me. Yes, they're really, really awful, and it's hard sometimes in the moment, and even after, to know where they're coming from. Like what has sparked it. And so what's really important when that happens to anyone who's listening to us, the main thing is to help your nervous system de-escalate the intensity of what is experienced. A deep breathing. We'll always come back to the breath. We'll always come back to the breath, and then we investigate what just happened here. And typically panic attacks are connected to fear, intense fear that something bad would happen.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a lot of, I think not a lot, but I've had panic attacks for sure. I think the ones that come off right away is like the two major ones that I remember. One of them, I was just on like a Coke binge for days, and then I had been on a bunch of Molly. So when I thought I was gonna die, I thought I might actually be dying at the Abbey right now. Like I'm on I'm on a lot of drugs. I might be that person on the dance floor, you know? And then I think the most recent one, I actually had it on an airplane, and I was like, oh my God, you know, you watch videos of people being like, this man opened up the door in first class, and everyone's kind of like flying in the wind and the masks are coming down. I'm like, that might be me at this moment, because I just had this weird thing where I'm like, do I need to call the stewardess to come talk to me? Like, I need air. Like, I need to open up a door or a window. Like, I need air. And so what helps me is I always actually carry gummy bears with me. Like, I always have like a sweet with me, and I'm very big on scent. So on top of the breathing as well has always helped me. But usually scent, if I put something on me, like it'll look, I can actually show you. I literally have like 3 colognes next to me, like just chilling next to me, because I love scent. So I'll smell it and it'll kind of ground me. And then the gummy bears usually allow me to kind of get that texture in. So just anything that kind of grounds me in that moment to allow me to get to the space of like, okay, what is the compass of my emotions trying to tell me? What is it that we want? What is it that's happening? And sometimes, you know, like on the plane, I was reading toxic text messages from like an old relationship that triggered that. And I was kind of like, maybe let's delete these text messages. Maybe let's not do this to ourselves when we're like thousands of feet up in the air. But I think that the grounding, it sounds easier than it actually is, you know? But anything that you can do to just ground yourself in that moment. You're here, you're here, you're here, you're here. You're not there, you're not over there, you're not in the past, you're not in the future. You're here. Breathe.
I wish it was that easy.
I know.
But that is the mindset, right? And to get yourself there. But we have so many rates, like high rates of like sexual abuse, domestic abuse, depression, suicide rates, especially among teenage girls. And I have 2 of them. And that's concurrent with stigmas and cultural beliefs and barriers to accessing mental health care, migration and acculturation trauma. Like, that's real trauma, what your parents went through when they came over here in the 80s from El Salvador, socioeconomic disparities, and of course, our family and community dynamics. So, Cheryl, how do we break down, no matter how resilient we are, and that's a part of us, right? But how do we break that down in order to actually address some of these issues? Sexual abuse is so prevalent and it's never talked about. And then at some point, again, manifests itself through some way. And we just have to be able to, at the very least, create safe spaces for people to talk about what they've been through.
Absolutely. And we begin at the households. And I think sometimes in our Latino community, we want to protect our children. So we delay conversations that are really important. And not just in the Latino community, in many of our communities, we delay conversations like sex, sexuality that are very important. And we need to begin early on talking about boundaries, talking about consent, talking about what's allowed, how you can say no, what is appropriate or inappropriate touch. I actually worked at a clinic not too long ago where we had a support group for little kids between 6 and 12, and we were teaching them how far can someone be before they get too close to me and I feel uncomfortable. These are the kind of conversations that we can be having now. You know, like, how far can someone get to me before you're like, no, I don't like it. I can say, hey, can you back away, please? So we begin with that. And I think we need to, coming back to the beginning conversation about like chancla and force, we really need to flip the script. And we really need to talk about healthy relationships. What does healthy relationships look like? And that begins in the household as well. Like, but we don't just have to talk about it. We need to model it. Well, how is it that we're relating to one another? Like, if kids grow up in an environment where the parents are not relating well to one another, that's what they learn as what they may think as behaviors. And anything that we learn become a template for what we're going to do in life later on. So it's not just about talking, but it's also about doing. And this is a call of action for all of us. How do we minimize violence and in the way that we talk to one another every day? You know, how do we notice our tone in how we're talking about it? How am I tuning into Curly, knowing that he does not like when, you know, there seems to be chaos or people get really loud, how do I tune into that and respect that? So these are the kind of conversations about that we need to be having. And I think they're all centered around respect and honoring each other's needs.
And feeling like you belong. And youth is a big concern for me in that mental wellness space, especially living in these times with so many triggers that are swirling around us. You can't really hide from it. Even if you're in your room and it's a safe space, you're actually in there with millions of people online. So what is the approach with youth? And Curly, you are very powerful among our youth, and especially the youth that are intersectional in terms of race, gender, sexual identity, ableism, religious beliefs, and so many other elements that make us so beautiful, but make us so complex. I worry about being able to feel like you belong when there's so many obstacles to that, when you're under constant scrutiny.
Absolutely. I worry about that a lot too. It's so funny, by the way, because my youth, the kids that grew up with me, they're all like in their 20s. They're all in college now. They're like, you were with me as my whole childhood. And I'm like, oh man, I'm getting there. I worry about the young kids, because you're right. Like before, our chisme, or like our little novela in the 6th grade was whatever girl we weren't getting along with. If I wasn't getting along with Georgina and Amanda, we would figure it out, and it was just between us, right? But now you see kind of like kids being on TikTok, on X, and on Instagram. Like I was talking to my little cousins, and they're 13 years old, and I was asking them about, like, what do you guys listen to? What are you guys talking about on the internet? And they were talking about, they're like, oh, we're talking about like toxic relationships and narcissism and all those things. And I'm like, what? You guys are so young. And my little cousin was like, that's why I'm afraid to get in a relationship. I'm actually afraid to even fall in love, because I'm afraid of dating a narcissist. And I'm kind of just like, I wasn't thinking about narcissists when I was a young person. I was in love with my 7th grade classmate, William Moran. And I was like, are we a thing? Or, I was writing notes like, do you like me back? Yes or no, circle 1. So I feel like what I think that we need to do with our kids is remind them, at least for me, like over and over again, I promise you it's not that serious right now. Like, yes, it feels really big because it's the first time that you're experiencing heartbreak. It's your first time experiencing a lot of these emotions. So it is really big. So I don't want to diminish how you're feeling. But I promise you're going to fall in love again. I promise you that everything that makes you different right now is going to make you a shit ton of money when you're older. I promise that all the things, the relationships that you're worried about, like ending, they're going to end no matter what. And the good ones will always stick there and be there no matter what. I've had the same best friend since I was 8 years old, where we have a little gang name that we've called ourselves since we were young kids. People used to make fun of my hair. Now that's literally my name. And what, like people are like, oh, the curly guy. Now that I'm silver, which they also used to make fun of, now I have a silver full head of hair. Like all these things that I'm like, I promise you, if you keep going, it will always be worth it. So like, even putting out content or reminding your kids or talking to people around you, like, just keep going. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be amazing. Like, if you would have told me, chubby little gay kid, glasses that people would make fun of, with a head that was too big for his body sometimes too, like, that I would be able to do cool things like this and talk to y'all and learn and converse about those things, that I would be able to have a friend who's a pop star, or like go and get invited to a cool premiere, or go to a really cool restaurant by the beach. Like, I would be like, okay, let's do it. It was worth it. So I just try to remind people always, like, it's worth it. Keep going.
Well, you're authentic is why all those things happen to you. That is clear and beautiful. And don't tell those kids that even at 60 years old, heartache still.
Oh,
that does not get any better. So Cheryl, what can we look at in terms of, because we've talked about things that are wrong, and I want to end with this question for both of you. What is the path to mental wellness? A lot of times we talk about fighting mental health issues, but what about that path to mental wellness? And I'll start. I walk up to 20,000 steps a day. And Cheryl, we've talked while I walked. And Curly, I'm going to call you one of these times. And
please, call me.
Walk endlessly. I look at nature. I find comfort. I talk to my friends. I listen to music, whatever it is. that was my kind of my projection towards mental wellness. And so many times we're so worried about avoiding mental health issues that we don't think about how to head towards mental wellness. Can you talk about that? And then I want to hear Curly.
And you're a fast walker. It's hard to keep up with. I'm like, oh my God, is this a
race? Are we racing?
It's so bad. I'm so impatient, like with even a walk, and I'm like, you're not going anywhere. You're just walking with your friend talking.
Oh my God. I'm a slow walker and I have asthma. I'd be like, slow down.
Oh my goodness, I'm the worst.
All right. So how do we cultivate wellness? We cultivate it every day. It's an everyday endeavor. It's just as important as how we breathe. You know, we feed ourselves to survive. We breathe to survive. We need to practice self-care and wellness every single day. And the way that I like to break that down is how we're nurturing our mind, how we're nurturing our body, how we're nurturing our spirit. Those are the three areas that make up our wellness. And it's not, we cannot wait until vacation time for those of us who have the luxury and privilege to sometimes take vacation. Not everyone has access to that. We do it every
That's another
thing.
Day. What about that work-life balance where you're under so much pressure, whether it's in the service industry where you don't get a break because otherwise you can't make money to feed your family and you're doing 2 or 3 jobs, whether you're an influencer, a social media influencer, like our friend Curly, a therapist, or even a nonprofit guy like me, like where do you find that work-life balance when you have all of these pressures attached to it?
Yeah, and, that's a big dilemma. Is there a work-life balance? And I say yes. And the way that I kind of think about work-life balance is that we sprinkle self-care throughout the day. So even if I have 5 minutes, and sometimes I work with clients, they're like, oh, everything you're saying is great, but I only have 5 minutes. And that's typically when I'm taking a shower. And I'm like, okay, great. What's your favorite music when you're taking a shower? Or what is the one thing that you could also do when you're taking a shower? So building in those moments of wellness, they become organic and automatic, and we're always then craving them. And then when we're at work, then we create presence and really mindful presence. So if we are at work, then we're at work. If I only have an hour with my kids, then I'm going to be fully present with my kids for that hour. So that's kind of how I see balance. Fully attuned to those we love and we care about. And at the end of the day, I had a boss who once told me this, and I was shocked by this. I was like, you're working me too hard. You know, you need to get me an assistant or whatever. And she kind of said jokingly, you know, you can always leave and go find a job because you have to really take care of you. Because at the end of the day, who's going to be at your funeral? And I'm thinking, I hope you're at my funeral if I need anything.
Yeah.
But it's a wake-up call. At the end of the day, work is not going to come with you.
Yeah.
Work will come with you to your funeral. You have to really prioritize life and well-being. And if you're in situations where work, it's obviously pressing, it helps our survival, then we need to find those few moments that we have to be with those that we love and be fully present with those that we love. So let's not wait for vacation time to self-care. And we do this every day by connecting with those that we love, whether by text, by phone, by video. We get back to the basics. Sleep well. Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well?
Yeah.
Those are the basic wellness and self-care. And you do things that bring you joy and repeat.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
I love that. I do love everything that you said, Cheryl. Like, I really always tell people it is about mind, body, and spirit. You have to water each of those plants. I think mental health is not or even just like, it's not a destination, right? You don't get there and you're suddenly like, woo, everything is great. It's a practice, but it's also important to consider that under the quote ordinary circumstances, right? This is assuming that you're not dealing with a clinical condition, right? Something that has been diagnosed. This is assuming that you don't have debilitating like anxiety, just like or something that might make it so that you don't function the way that a lot of other people do. So under the ordinary circumstances, if you're able to move, get some sunlight, get some water, dance, laugh, do things that make you happy. Like, don't forget to live. Being patient with yourself too, understanding that it's okay to fluctuate in your emotions as well, right? I think about the waves that move back and forth. I think about the lungs that bring in air and then let them out. the seasons changing, our bank accounts sometimes fluctuating, right? Like it is a part of nature to kind of move back and forth into certain emotions. I really just feel like patience for me, and then gratitude, like being able to kind of be like, I'm thankful. I saw this interview with Erykah Badu, and she was saying that when you create art, you have to be thankful for everything that comes with it, the good and the ugly. So when you're creating life and you're living, you have to be grateful for the good and the ugly, like being in that gratitude. And lastly, I wanted to say on the show with Dead and Buried, I would have really good conversations with like death doulas. And I was speaking to this death doula, and she was talking about how towards the end of people's lives, like the first thing that goes is your autonomy, right? Your ability to be able to get up, feed yourself, move around, go to the market, go visit a friend. Your life goes from being really big to smaller. And you suddenly go from living this big life to living off of one street, and then one house, and then one room, and then one bed in that room. And then that's it. And then you go. So in the meantime, go have fun, like enjoy yourself as much as you can, visit friends, see family, eat the, Alua Arthur says, eat the piece of cake. Like, who cares if you're on a diet? Like, if, like just live it up as much as you can. And so I think that if you're watering the pots of mind, body, and health, being patient with yourself, if you don't, you might not always get it right. I certainly never do. Stay in your gratitude, and then also have a little piece of cake. Like, chill out, eat some cheesecake. Like, go hang out, go make out with somebody, text the ex, go be toxic, make some bad choices, and have a good time in life. We're only here for a flash in the pan.
All right, so I will add my element to this, that I feel very strongly about this. The backup plan to every relationship that you have is you. To your parents. My mom passed away 27 years ago. My kids are going to go off and go to college. Whoever your partner is, that there are no guarantees, as I was told recently. The relationships you have at work, your identity tied to work. Everything, every friend you have, appreciate it while it's happening, love it, depend on it, lean on it, but just know, the back of your mind, that the backup plan to every one of those relationships is going to be you. So plan accordingly, love yourself, support yourself, appreciate yourself. And that's how we will end this wonderful discussion on mental wellness for National Mental Health Month. And I couldn't pick two better people than Curly and Cheryl. And I just want to finish with this, because culture comforts. We've talked about it in one way or the other, whether it's nature, whether it's music, whether it's a book, whether it's smells, or whether it's your parents, like jumping into your mom's bed. It's culture comforts us. And when you don't have access to healthcare, when you don't have access to a culturally relevant therapist or anyone else, or often money, but culture is all around us. So I want to hear from both of you very quickly, and we can start with Cheryl. What food gives you comfort, and what canción? It could be something that your abuelita used to hum or your abuelo used to sing, and then other things like smells. Like, to me, the smell of stuff burning, like palm trees or whatever it is that's thrown into a pit in Nicaragua, the minute I land, there is a smell to burning something or other that I get right in the airport, and it weirdly comforts me. So what are those? And then I want to hear from Curly too. So start with a song.
Ooh, I think anything by Selena Quintanilla, like that brings my spirits. Oh, I actually have too many. Then I'm thinking Celia Cruz. Then I'm thinking Mark Anthony. Anything that uplifts the spirit. Pupusas for life. Pupusas
Yes.
for life. Day, night, and daytime. All day, every day. Pupusas for life. And I forgot the last question.
Oh, like smells or smell. Texture, or it could be anything. Like,
yeah, the smell. It's funny because I don't drink coffee, but I love the smell of coffee.
I'm the same way with cigars, because my abuelo used to smoke cigars. I don't smoke cigars, but the smell, like, weirdly comforts me. That's so funny.
feels homey. It feels like, I'm back in Honduras. It feels like I'm just waking up into my kitchen back when I was a child. So that's a comforting smell that I make coffee here for my husband, and I make it as much for him as it is for me, so I can.
All right, let's go to Curly.
I love that. I feel like for music, it depends on my mood, right? Like most of the times, if I'm feeling a little down, I will say I listen to Beyonce's Renaissance. It might not be like Latino culturally, but it is cultural to me.
Doesn't matter.
Cultural. Look, listen to Renaissance. It's so good. Or I listen to City Girls. City Girls are like two raperas from Miami, and they're just like, they're out here trying to con men out of their money, and same, me too. So I love, I'm out here in my car they have a song called Piñata, and they try to talk in Spanish, and it is so funny. It's like, City Girls is my jam. So I listen to City Girls. I think comfort food, people ask me what's the best Salvadorian restaurant in LA. I'm like, to me, it's my mom's house or my tia's house. Like, when we make sopa de res, like, it's my jam. My mom makes pupusas and tortillas a mano like almost every other day. So I come over. I'm very lucky to be like, eating my little pupusa on the run. And I feel like smells, I'm always burning incense or my favorite candles from Ross. So anything that like just smells like Bath and Body Works, the candle aisle at Ross, I'm here for it, and of course, like, Palo Santo and sage and even copal. Copal is always really nice to burn and always brings me some sort of peace. But I'm also not mad at peach plum from Bath and Body Works.
That's beautiful. Thank you both so much for joining me and our Fritanga podcast. I can't tell you how you have both lifted me, and just being able to interview people that just enlightened me and inspired me and comforted me is such a privilege. You're both beautiful, and keep caring. Not enough people care, and both of you care, and I just want to thank you for caring so much.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you so much for having me. And Cheryl, you were so much fun to listen to, so thank you so much.